Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with Quintessence last, our level 32 brute, who has over 1.75 million XP, 249,000, so just under a quarter of a million experience to go to get to level 33 and our next three enhancement slots. And we are on the Unity Plague story arc for Jenny Firkins, who says Dr. Ito and his team have finished the cure, and now they just need to distribute it to the city. Unfortunately, there's a complication, and that's where they needed some help. Are you willing to distribute the cure for the Unity Plague? It won't be easy. In order to make the cure that could counter the Unity Plague and prevent future infection, Dr. Ito had to re-engineer the plague itself so the cure is, well, semi-intelligent, and the devouring earth can detect it. So there's a very good chance they'll be trying to stop you. Let's go ahead and do it. So now we're going to go on this mission where we're going to go from zone to zone and distribute the Unity Plague to some of our friends who are the guys that do the leveling up in the various zones. I actually really like this mission. It's not an indoor combat mission. It's a mission where you're going to see all of your old friends who you've met for the last 30 levels, all the guys who train you up, the other heroes of the city who stand there and teach us how to be heroes and so forth. And we distribute the plague, and it's a very heroic thing to do. I really like it. Kind of the City of Heroes equivalent of rescuing a cat out of a tree. Next we go to King's Row, and so we're going to go ahead and hit all the sites in Paragon City. I hope you guys have been enjoying this playthrough. I'm very much enjoying playing this brute. I'm having a lot of fun. It feels a lot like playing a scrapper, which, as you all know, is my favorite class to play. Brute is very close second, and probably a little bit above Stalker. I also like Stalkers a lot too. I love being able to, go invisible and assassinate people with the Stalker. I like being able to build Fury as a brute, and I love doing crits and tons of damage as a scrapper. So it's always fun to play those classes for me. I like them a lot, and I've been enjoying it. I hope everybody's been having fun. I definitely have as well. If you're somebody who watches this and doesn't play City of Heroes, I highly recommend it. There are lots of different servers in addition to Homecoming and Rebirth. There are a couple of others. And you can probably fairly easily find a server that works well as a home for you. It's a wonderful game, and my favorite MMO. And I'm not sure I would have said it at the time it first came out. I really liked Star Wars Galaxies a lot, and I thought this game was kind of shallow because it was pretty much just combat, and Star Wars Galaxies had crafting and all sorts of cool stuff. And no, I don't think that them putting the crafting into City of Heroes did a damn thing to make it a better game. I actually don't like the crafting in City of Heroes, but I found that I really like the gameplay they do have, and I find it fun and interesting and engaging, and something that I like doing pretty much every day, often more than once a day. So, yeah, I really enjoy the game, and if you've been watching and not sure whether you want to play or not, it's free. And it'll run on modern computers really easily. It's not like in the past where you needed a beast of a machine to run it. You can run it on any old machine from even 10 years ago, and the machine will have no trouble. And if you have anything newer than the last 10 or 12 years, it'll be super easy. My machine doesn't even notice there's a game running. Um, so, yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a super fun game. You can play it for free, and it's pretty easy to get into and learn to play, and a lot of fun to level up your characters. You don't have to do what I do. You don't have to take a really long time and do every single story arc. You can get tons of bonus XP from pay-to-win vendors or other sources. Heck, I've got a whole bunch of them somewhere in here in my powers. I've got bonus experience. I've got many doses of it. I don't know, somewhere in there. I'm not going to look for it now. Um, and so you can level up really fast if you wanted. You don't have to do it the way I do it. There are so many different ways to play. And if you go on the Homecoming servers, you can find lots of people to play with. Rebirth is a bit of a desert, but Homecoming has lots of people still playing it. And they have a bunch of different servers, so you can find role players or PvPers or whatever you want. And there are lots of different ways to play, so I highly encourage anyone who's maybe become interested through watching this, I hope a few people have, to go ahead and try some COH. It's a great game. So now we are going to Penelope in boop. And then we're going to go to, I think it's Manticore. Yep, in Brickstown. So a couple more zones. We've been to each zone in the city, each of the main zones, not obviously the hazard zones. And we've managed to distribute the cure to all but Brickstown and Founders Falls. You know, it's interesting that they didn't update this to include like Overbrook and the Hollows and stuff, Croatoa, when they added those zones. Last one will be Numina, who is in Founders Falls. And then we are done with distributing the plague, and that should have saved everybody. And I think we do have a battle to fight. I'm fairly certain. I don't think this is the end of the story arc. I think we're going to have to fight a boss, if I'm not mistaken. We're getting to the stage, guys, where we probably want to start setting the missions on +2. Because we're fighting a lot of +2s now in our +1 missions, and we're doing fine with those, and the +1s are actually a little too weak. There's a reason I haven't buffed it yet, and the reason is the enhancement slots. We're going to need to make sure we've got enough accuracy on these and maybe add some extra accuracies because we're going to whiff so much. So I just want to get a few more enhancement slots into our powers. By level 34 or so, we're going to be moving up to +2 because we'll have enough accuracy and such that we'll be in good shape, and we'll have our first set in. In fact, I need to check and see. We do have enough influence. We can buy one more of these enhancers. We'll then have 4 of the 6, and it'll just be another maybe week or two, and we'll be able to slot that set in. So Numina, I've been watching your progress, Quintessence Last, and you've done very well. Now, however, I must deliver you a dire warning. The despicable Devouring Earth have already begun to work on a counter-agent to the cure. Go now and speak with the one who sent you. So we'll contact Jenny, who says you did it. Normally, I'd say you should take some time out to celebrate, but Numina's warning changes everything. The Devouring Earth are really working on a counter-agent. To the cure you delivered, we may have to move fast. I spoke with Dr. Ito about Numina's warning. He agrees that if the Devouring Earth could develop a counter-agent quickly, they might be able to prevent the cure you distributed from taking effect. The Unity Plague may still be upon us. In order to distribute the counter-agent quickly enough, the Devouring Earth would have to introduce into the water supply near the purification system. Will you go into the sewers and destroy? Yes, we're going to destroy the counter-agent, and of course we're going back to the sewers, because heroes always spend time in the sewers. I think my players are going to be spending some time in the sewers of the city of Rome, too. It always ends up happening. You end up in the sewers. It's pretty filthy, and it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it, right? So we're off to King's Row. And there we will hopefully destroy the counter-agent. And I don't know if this is the last or there's one more mission after this. I can't remember. We're getting toward the end of it. And you can see that from kind of the length of this. As the story arcs get longer and longer, sooner or later they stop the text, right? There's only just so much text. And so the longer and longer it becomes, the more you're getting toward the ending. At least of the old school story arcs. The newer ones don't have much text. we go. Hopefully I'll remember to put on combat jump this time. Oh, and right there we start with a boss. That is cool. I love fighting bosses. Here we go. Move a little bit so we can see him. Now that we've got somebody else in our AoE, let's go ahead and do the Soul Drain. That buffs us up. And now we're doing almost 200% damage. That is some serious damage our character has been able to do. Look at that. Now we're using a lot of endurance. I haven't been that worried about it, mainly because we are able to gain endurance by just jumping into a bunch of bad guys and sucking their endurance our way, you know, kind of like, well, this. So in the last episode, I mentioned that I wanted to kind of talk about various different aspects of role-playing games. I've been doing this in the context primarily of Dungeons and Dragons, but of course it can apply to just about any role-playing game because the principles are generally the same when you're talking about things like courtesy toward other players or toward the DM or player agency or anything like that. And you know, this can apply to Champions, it can apply to Call of Cthulhu or any other role-playing game you care to think of. GURPS, Savage Worlds, it doesn't really matter. And I've talked in the last couple of episodes about manners being, for players, being to try, and as best as you can, to try as hard as you can to have your character, you know, go on the adventures that the DM creates, to cooperate, for lack of a better term, with the DM. After all, role-playing is cooperative storytelling. And try and send your character, you know, let your character get sent on the, you know, on the adventures. And why am I missing so much? And so that's one topic. And then in the previous episode, we were talking about sandboxing versus railroading and player agency and that sort of thing. And I said these are related, and they're also related to some other topics I've talked about. I'm not going to talk about how they're related yet. Let's go on to the next topic that I have. And that is the Amulet of the Plains in D&D. And this is, I guess, again, you know, a little bit about player agency. But it's sort of about who controls the campaign and who should control the campaign and who should be making the decisions about what the campaign is about. And I would argue, of course, that the person who should be deciding that is the Dungeon Master or the GM. Right, I mentioned in the previous episode that it's possible to play City of Heroes by doing something like running a villain game, like in the Great Super Villain Contest, the GSVC. And you could be running a bunch of villains if you and the players and the DM have all agreed that it's something you want to do that's villain role-playing. But you don't get to just decide by yourself as a player that you're going to be a villain and you're going to make everybody play villains and that's the sort of role-play we're going to do. Right? It's something everybody has to kind of agree with. Because it's not just your game and it's not just your table, it's everybody's game and everybody's table. And so, so this topic was brought up in the D&D Beyond forums, where one of the DMs had, and you know, there's no indication that this DM was unhappy about it. He had allowed his players to have access to an object from D&D that's in the game, it's in the book, called the Amulet of the Plains. And the Amulet of the Plains allows the players to basically travel to any plane they want. They have to make a saving throw in order to succeed at it. And the saving throw basically leads to about a 50-50 chance of doing it. And so 50% of the time they're going to go to the plane they desire, and 50% of the time they're going to go to some random plane. And I made the comment that I would never give that object to my players, because I don't want the players deciding the plane of existence on which we're going to be playing tonight. They can do it at any time on a whim in the middle of a session. They don't need your permission technically. Your permission is you gave them the item, right? If you give it to them, there aren't any charges. It's not limited to so many times a day. You just, anytime the players want, they can just say, I want to try to go to another plane, tell you the plane, and make the attempt. That's it, right? They don't, there's no, there are no checks, except if they fail the saving throw, they still go to another plane, just not the one they picked. One that's randomly chosen or selected by the DM or what have you. And so they say, we're trying to go to the plane of, I don't know, the Abyss, and the DM says, okay, make your roll, and if they fail their saving throw, instead of going to the Abyss, they go to the elemental plane of fire or something. And what I said there is, look, an elemental plane like that requires the DM to do some prep. I mean, you got to figure out what's on the plane. There's almost no help for you in any of the literature. The DM's guide does not provide you with any significant assistance in terms of what these planes are like. They give you very, very vague, very sort of generic descriptions of them. The plane of fire has got a lot of fire on it and fire elementals. It's got a city called the City of Brass, and that's about it, right? The plane of air has air elementals and Aarakocra on it, and that's about it. And they don't really give you much to work with. Now, there are older resources, like from 4th edition, 3rd edition, 2nd, 1st edition, about these planes, but there aren't any 5th edition, and there's no help in the DM's guide. It just gives you like a paragraph or two about each of these planes. So you would now have to basically make it all up from scratch. You'd have to homebrew the planes, right? And not everybody is going to be good as a DM at just coming up with a homebrew of not just a kingdom or something, but an entire plane of existence that you don't know anything about before this all starts, right? An entire plane of existence that you don't really know anything about until you make it up. Not everybody's going to be good at improving that. Not every DM is going to want to improv that. And what I simply said was, look, the player doesn't get to make that decision. I'm not giving that amulet to my players because I don't want them deciding to go to a plane that I don't even have any idea how the plane works. I don't know anything about who lives there. I haven't made that crap up. And it isn't made up by D&D. Like, they don't really tell you. It's very, very vague. Yeah, the Abyss has got demons in it. That's it. And they'll, like, if you look up the individual demons in the monster manual, it'll tell you, well, this demon lives on this plane and that demon lives on that plane. But they don't really tell you not plane, but the levels. There are 666 levels of the Abyss. Well, this one lives on level 431. But what's that level like? I don't know. It's one line, half a sentence. They don't explain it to you. So now you've got to make all that up. And what I simply said was, the player doesn't get to tell the DM what he has to make up. You can't do that. Because the DM's the one who's doing the creative work, and you can't make somebody be creative about something. I've had this issue to some degree, actually, with my friend and his girlfriend and his mother. And I've mentioned this before, his character's mom is, like, missing. She abandoned him, and he doesn't know why. And he didn't decide why. He told me to make it up. In retrospect, I should have said to him, either you make it up or take it out of your background. I'm not making that up. But he wanted me to do it, and, trying to be a good DM, all right, I'll make it up for him. And I did do it. But you can't really make somebody be creative. I had a really hard time with this because just because he thinks there should be a cool story there doesn't mean I'm going to be able to come up with one. And just because a player thinks the elemental plane of fire should be a cool place on which to adventure doesn't mean I'm going to be able to come up with something cool. Right? There is such a thing as DM writer's block. And you can't you shouldn't, as a player, I argued, be committing a DM to coming up with something that they're not comfortable coming up with, or they don't think is going to be fun to come up with, or they don't have any ideas about. You shouldn't be doing that. And so, as we had this conversation, a couple of the DMs on that thread expressed the idea that, look, if your players want to do it, you should make it happen. Just suck it up as a DM and make it happen. And I don't agree with that. I think that having to do something is not fun. And that's a sentry. Let's get out of here. He's got a cairn down. And Mac Oval actually has a video of this about DMing should be fun, right? And if it feels like something you have to do instead of something you want to do, it's not going to work. And so he argues quite emphatically that you have to be excited about it. If I'm not excited about the plane of fire, as a player, you do not want me. Why is he walking away? If I'm not excited about going to the plane of fire, as a player, you do not want me to try. You do not want to have to try to force me to send your character to the plane of fire, right? Because if I'm not excited about it, the session won't be any fun. So you have to give the DM or GM the chance to make the adventure be fun for them, and try not to force the GM into doing things that the GM doesn't think is any fun. So, for example, at the Great Supervillain Contest, it says right at the beginning, the cool thing about this is supervillain role-playing. You have your players make up villains and play villains. And my immediate response to that was, no. That's not going to be fun for me. I don't like running bad guys. I don't like the bad guys. I want the bad guys to lose. I'm not interested in running villain roleplay. So I ran it from only the hero side, and what I let them do, which I thought worked really well, is once the heroes found out that the contest was going on, they got the idea, which was awesome, to infiltrate it. And so they came up with 2 or 3 of the characters. One of the characters pretended to turn into a villain, and they staged a thing where he fought his teammates, and then other heroes came in. And the heroes were all in on it, so they all through the fight, but they tried to make it, they tried to make it as believable as possible. And I told them, I'm going to give the villains intelligence rolls to see if they believe you, and the heroes pulled it off, and it worked really well. They were very convincing. They did role play. I think I made it presence attacks. I can't remember. And they got bonuses because they role played it really well, and I thought it was a job well done. So I said, okay. So it worked. They didn't convince the one villain named Overlord. He knew what they were up to, but since he didn't trust the guy that was running the contest anyway, he actually teamed up with the heroes, which was a super fun kind of a brainstorm that I just had in the middle of it all. And it was pretty awesome. But so the one guy pretended to turn evil. The other guy, they pretended his character was killed, and then he came back with a different costume, completely covering his face as a new character. So his character's name was Assaulter. And he came up with a character named Assassin, and just pretended to be a villain named Assassin, right? And then the fake villains racked up a whole bunch of points in the contest by defeating the heroes, and the heroes, of course, threw the fights. And this got them into the next round of the contest, and then they had to, each villain had to go capture a hero. So those guys had to, capture heroes, and they were like, good, this is perfect, because what it allowed them to do was capture heroes that they then could try to break out of the prison, so the rest of their team could then be with them. So it was really cool. and it worked really well, and they didn't actually play villains because I wasn't down to do that as a GM. It was everybody's favorite, I think everybody's favorite adventure that we ever played. It was so good that when I ran my long-term campaign, because I did this originally when I was when we were doing rotating GMs, when I ran my 2-year campaign, the players in the 2-year campaign were all different. They hadn't actually been in the GSVC, but they'd heard about it. So they all were like, oh man, we wish we'd been in it. So then I sprung it on them. And they'd heard all these great stories. I mean, I changed it so that they couldn't just, like, knowing what had happened in the past, be able to just easily get through it. But I sprang it on them. And because it was a different universe. So that was this universe's version of the GSVC. And obviously I tweaked it, but as soon as they realized what it was, they were like, "Oh, awesome! This is the GSVC. We're really psyched," and they had a lot of fun with it. Unbelievable. The constant missing. And this is why I'm not upping it to +2, because the constant missing would be even worse. And you've got to get these sentries out of the cairns. Or you won't do any damage to them. So yeah, what you can't do, or you shouldn't do as a player, is say, GM, this book says it's super villain role-playing, and I want a super villain role-play. And you have to do it. And it's not fair if you don't do it, and you're not a good GM if you don't do it. No, you need the GM to be happy and to enjoy the game. And so you have to let the GM do things that are fun for the GM. So always remember that. And if the GM says, look, I'm not going to give you an Amulet of the Plains because I don't want you traveling to all these planes because I don't want to make the planes up. I want to play in the prime material plane. Well, then you need to suck it up as a player. Or, as I pointed out to in that thread, step it up and be the GM. If you want to go to the elemental planes of fire and air and water, that's fine. Agree to be the DM. And you take the party there. If you want to be in that plane so badly, you be the DM. I mean, similarly with my friend, he's, I think, really wants this one character, this girlfriend character, to stay with the party and be in a lot of adventures. And so, to some degree, if you really want her to be in, if you want her to be a recurring character, take over as GM and you play her. Right? Otherwise, you accept what the DM is willing to do, and you don't ask the DM to do things that aren't going to be fun for them. Now, this is just one character, right? So obviously that's a different story. But if we're talking about, like, going to an entire part of the universe that's going to require map making and NPC creation and stuff, as a player, you don't get to force the DM to make up maps and cities and landscapes and NPCs and all of that just because you want them, right? And then cry foul if the DM says, I don't want to make those up. That's not going to be fun for me. That's a recipe. Forcing the DM to do that is a recipe for the end of the campaign, right? You're not going to be playing D&D for very long if you try and force the GM to do something he doesn't like, right? I guarantee you the GSVC would not have been even slightly as fun for the players if I had, against my better judgment, done villain roleplay, even though I didn't really want to do that, just because it said so in the book, or because I thought maybe the players might like it. Again, as a GM, your tendency is to take it on the chin and do things that your players are going to enjoy because you're trying to make them have fun, right? But you also need to enjoy it too. And it also needs to be something that's in your wheelhouse, right? If all these different elemental planes and outer planes are not in the GM's wheelhouse, forcing the GM to participate in that is probably a really bad idea, because you're not going to get good adventures. If the GM's like really good at making pirate adventures, and you try to force him to do Game of Thrones type of palace intrigue, which he's not good at, you're going to get bad adventures. Like, I'm terrible at comedy. I'm just not a funny person. I enjoy laughing, but I am not good at making up jokes. I'm horrible at it. So you would not want me to run a comedy campaign. It wouldn't work. It would be terrible. The jokes would not work. They wouldn't be funny. You wouldn't laugh. You'd groan. You'd roll your eyes. You'd be sorry you ever got into this. Is that the way you want to play D&D? I wouldn't think so. Right? What you want from D&D is to have a good time. Best way to have a good time is to let your GM do what is fun for the GM. The GM is having fun, you'll have fun. If the GM is miserable, you're going to be miserable. Why is it so hard to hit fungi? They're stationary. They should have no defense. So we have 3 more barrels to destroy, and there's 1 more sentry, I believe. Yeah, so in this discussion I said, well, look, I just wouldn't give my players the Amulet of the Plains, and then they can't go to these places. And most of the people on that thread were like, well, that's fine. If you give it to them, you have to let them use it. And I would agree with that. That's why I would never give it to them. And it was just a few people who said, no, if the players express that they want one, you should give it to them so that they can have fun. And that I don't agree with. Because at some point, at some level, the DM has to be having fun too, and has to be doing what's comfortable for that person. Somebody else then mentioned, what they say, there's a spell called Plane Shift. They said, well, what are you going to do when the players cast Plane Shift? And the one guy pointed out, yeah, but Plane Shift has a material component. And that material component is, I can stand here to get endurance. So it's not changing my 2-hit, and then I'll pull them out. The Plane Shift has a material component, which is a tuning fork that has been tuned to the plane of existence. And he was like, well, you know, unless the DM gives you one, you don't have one. I mean, where are you going to get it from? And another Cairn. These guys are absolutely ridiculous. They shouldn't be able to do it that much. It should be that once you pull them out of there, they're out. It shouldn't recharge every 10 seconds like that, or whatever it is. So yeah, always remember that as there's one set of videos I watched by these guys called the Dungeon Dudes, and they were talking about something entirely different, but they made this really great comment. And they said you have to realize in D&D the weak link is the DM. If the DM is pulling their hair out, if the DM is miserable, if the DM isn't having a good time, if the DM is unhappy, like the easiest way for the DM to stop being unhappy becomes not playing, your game is over. Right? If the easiest way for the DM to stop being miserable is to stop playing the game, your game is going to end. Because the DM isn't having fun, and that's going to be it. Nobody is in D&D to be miserable. Nobody. You're in D&D to have fun. And yes, the DM's job is to help the players have fun, but the players shouldn't be doing things, you shouldn't be trying to force the DM to do things for them that then make the DM miserable. Again, the DM is the weak link. There's a reason why so many more people want to play D&D than there are DMs to run for them. And there are always people looking for DMs. Right? And the reason is, that's the end of the story arc. Too bad we didn't have to fight an elite boss. The reason that there are so many more players than DMs, and there are always people looking for DMs, and when a DM says, DM looking for players, they get swamped, is because hardly anyone wants to do that work. It's a lot of work, right? And therefore, that DM is not only the weak link in the sense that the DM has to do the work and can easily be fried and burnt out and then not want to do it anymore. But if that DM doesn't want to do it, often you have no DM. that nobody else in your group either has the qualities of being a DM or the desire to do it. We found that, as I've said in previous stories in my group, there were other people who occasionally GM'd a little bit in Champions, but pretty much if I wasn't doing it, it wasn't going to get done. They would run for a little while, but there was nobody who was going to sit there for 2 years making adventures week after week. So if I hadn't done it, we wouldn't have been playing Champions, right? And so therefore you can't just go around doing things that make your GM miserable, because then the GM's just not going to GM for you. So just be careful about that, folks, and be careful what you ask for, and make sure that what you're asking for isn't something that's going to make the GM unhappy. And if you find out that it is making the GM unhappy, stop asking for it. Otherwise, you won't be playing your Champions or Call of Cthulhu or GURPS or Savage Worlds or D&D game for much longer. Let's call Jenny, and she says the threat of the Unity Plague is over. My gosh, we're halfway through level 32 already with one story arc. The threat of the Unity Plague is over. You did it, Quintessence last. The whole city owes you. With the cure in place, we should be able to reduce the threat of any similar viruses in the future. The city government is also working with FEMA to stockpile stores of the cure in case the Devouring Earth try again. All right. So we're done with Jenny Firkins, and we finished our story arc. So I'm going to start working on somebody else. I haven't decided who yet. Maybe Stemmitz. And I will bring you guys back when we are ready to start the next story arc, which is probably going to be pretty close to level 33, but we'll see. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.